You are listening to Blackout Radio. It is 6:17 in the morning on the East Coast of the United States, and we are interrupting all scheduled programming to bring you a developing situation that our team has been monitoring for the past 40 minutes. What we are about to report is confirmed. Confirmed by 3 independent financial data streams, by the Federal Reserve's own overnight wire traffic, which was leaked to our newsroom at approximately 5:40 this morning, and by emergency communications now being transmitted between the Treasury Department and the offices of at least 11 sitting U.S. senators. At approximately 4:59 Eastern Time this morning, currency markets registered an event that has no modern precedent. The U.S. dollar, the reserve currency of the global economy, the anchor of international trade for the better part of 80 years, lost approximately 52% of its value against a basket of major global currencies within a window of less than 11 minutes. I want to be very precise about that number. 52%. Not a decline, not a correction, not a dip, a collapse. In practical terms, $1 US, which closed yesterday at standard valuation, now purchases the equivalent of 48 cents worth of goods, services, and foreign currency. We do not yet have a confirmed cause. We do not yet have a statement from the White House. We do not yet have full clarity on what this means for the morning ahead. But we are here, we are live, and we are not going anywhere.
I want to take just a moment before we go deeper into the numbers, because I think it's important that we acknowledge what this moment actually is for real people who are waking up right now, pouring their first cup of coffee, getting their kids ready for school, and turning on this radio. You're hearing this and you're probably frightened. That's a completely rational response. What Daniel just described is not a stock market correction that will sort itself out by afternoon. This is the kind of number, 52%, that doesn't have a soft landing attached to it. People are already calling in to our listener line. We've been receiving messages since before 5 o'clock this morning, and I want to read a few of them as we go because I think the human texture of this moment matters just as much as the data. The first message came in at 5:09 from a woman in Columbus, Ohio, who says, and I'm quoting directly, "My husband works nights at the distribution warehouse. He called me 20 minutes ago and said his supervisor got a call and told everyone to hold the loading docks. No trucks going out, no explanation. Our mortgage renews in 3 weeks. I don't know what to do." That's one voice. There are tens of millions of voices like hers right now. We're going to honor all of them tonight.
To give our listeners a technical framework for what has happened, let me walk through the sequence of events as we currently understand them. Currency markets operate 24 hours a day, and in the overnight hours, between roughly 2 and 5 Eastern, trading volume is dominated by Asian and European financial centers: Tokyo, Shanghai, Singapore, Frankfurt, London. At approximately 4:47 Eastern, which corresponds to 5:47 Central European Time and 6:47 in the Gulf States, an automated sell order of extraordinary size was executed across multiple currency exchange platforms simultaneously. Our financial desk is describing the size of this order as, quote, "structurally impossible under normal conditions." The dollar began sliding against the euro, the yen, the Swiss franc, the pound, the yuan, and a cluster of emerging market currencies almost simultaneously. By 4:53, the slide had crossed the threshold that triggers circuit breakers on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange and the Intercontinental Exchange. Those circuit breakers, which are designed to pause trading and give markets time to breathe, did not stop the slide. They paused it for approximately 90 seconds. When trading resumed, the sell pressure had, if anything, intensified. By 4:59, we had reached the 52% figure. Trading was then suspended across most major platforms. At this hour, currency markets remain largely frozen. The dollar is not currently being actively traded at any price. That is an extraordinary sentence to say on a morning broadcast, but it is accurate.
I want to bring in what's happening at street level right now, because the financial architecture is one piece of this, but the human response is already underway and it is moving fast. We have correspondents. I should say we have contacts, because our correspondents are not on location. They are calling us from their homes and their neighborhoods, and that in itself tells you something about this morning. A contact in Miami, Florida, who asked us not to use his name, told us that as of about 30 minutes ago, the line outside the ATMs on Brickell Avenue was stretching around the block. People in pajamas, people still in work clothes from a night shift, people with children. He said he counted what looked like 40 or 50 people at a single ATM cluster, and that the machines had already run out of cash. In Phoenix, Arizona, we have a contact reporting that a Costco location near the I-17 opened its doors at 6, which is 2 hours ahead of its normal schedule, and that the parking lot was full before the doors opened. She says she watched a man try to load 14 cases of bottled water into a cart by himself. She says no one was laughing. In Chicago, we're hearing from a contact near the Loop that the Metro train platforms are crowded, unusually crowded for this hour, with people who appear to be leaving the city, not going to work, leaving.
We are now approximately 1 hour and 20 minutes into this event, and the data picture is beginning to clarify in some areas, while deepening in complexity in others. I want to address the international dimension, because this is not a story that stops at U.S. borders. The dollar's collapse is already reverberating through every economy that holds dollar-denominated reserves, which is to say, virtually every economy on Earth. The countries most immediately exposed are those with the largest dollar reserve holdings and those with the greatest volume of dollar-denominated debt. At the top of that list, predictably, are Japan, which holds approximately $1.1 trillion in U.S. Treasury securities, China, with approximately $850 billion, the United Kingdom at approximately $660 billion, and Brazil, India, and South Korea, each holding reserves in the 200 to 400 billion range. What a 52% devaluation means for those countries is not abstract. It means that the value of their reserve holdings has been cut in half overnight. Japan's $1.1 trillion in reserves is now worth, in real purchasing power terms, approximately $520 billion. That is a loss of roughly $580 billion in a single morning. For a country of Japan's size, that is not a manageable quarterly loss. That is a structural rupture.
We're now receiving calls and messages from outside the United States, and I want to share some of them because this broadcast reaches listeners in a lot of places, and those listeners deserve to know they are being heard. A message from a listener in Toronto, Canada. We went to the grocery store this morning because we'd heard rumors last night and wanted to stock up. The shelves in the bread aisle were already half empty, and it wasn't even 7 o'clock. The cashier looked like she'd been crying. My wife is 8 months pregnant, and I don't know what I'm supposed to tell her right now. A message from Lagos, Nigeria. The Naira was already struggling. Now we're hearing the dollar is gone. This is to destroy the import market here. We import everything, medicines, engine parts, baby formula, everything priced in dollars. I am begging anyone who can hear this. Someone needs to act. And a message, which was sent to our website and read to me by our digital desk, from a woman in Manila in the Philippines. My husband sends remittances from New Jersey every 2 weeks. That money is how we eat, how we pay the school fees. Please, is the money gone? Is he okay? Can someone tell us what is happening? We don't have answers to all of those questions yet, but we hear you. We will keep reporting.
At 2 hours and 40 minutes into this event, we are beginning to receive infrastructure reports that paint a picture of compounding logistical failures. I want to go through these systematically. First, aviation. The Federal Aviation Administration has issued a ground stop for all commercial departures out of JFK International, LaGuardia, O'Hare International, LAX, and Dallas-Fort Worth. The stated reason in the FAA notice is, quote, coordination with Customs and Border Protection regarding currency verification protocols. What that almost certainly means is that CBP does not currently have a stable framework for processing international travel when the baseline value of the currency used to purchase tickets, pay landing fees, and fund airline operations has just halved. We expect additional airports to follow within the hour. Second, ports. The Port of Los Angeles and the Port of Long Beach, which together handle roughly 40% of U.S. container imports, have suspended outbound processing and placed incoming vessels in a holding pattern. There are currently 37 container ships sitting in the approaches to those ports, waiting for guidance on how to process cargo manifests, priced in now devalued dollars. Third, banking. The FDIC has issued a statement, I have it here, stating that all federally insured banks may, at their discretion, impose temporary withdrawal limits. That statement came out at 5:51 this morning. What we do not know yet is whether any banks have begun imposing those limits.
We're crossing the 3-hour mark now, and I want to talk about hospitals, not because we have reports of mass casualties from violence, well, not yet, but because hospitals are economic organisms. They run on contracts, supply chains, vendor agreements priced in dollars. I spoke 20 minutes ago with a contact who is a supply chain coordinator at a regional hospital in Memphis, Tennessee. She asked me not to use her name or her hospital's name, which I respect and understand. She told me that as of about 90 minutes ago, her hospital's pharmaceutical vendor called to say they were suspending deliveries pending, quote, contractual reassessment. She said she had no idea what that meant in practical terms. She said she was trying to find out whether they had enough insulin in stock for their diabetic patients through the next 72 hours. She said, and these are her words, we have surgical patients on scheduled procedures this morning. I don't know what to tell the surgeons. I don't know what to tell anyone. That is not a data point. That is a person. That is a hospital. That is a system that was not built to absorb a morning like this one, and I think we need to sit with that for a moment.
4 hours and 11 minutes into this event, and we now have our first confirmed government statement. The U.S. Treasury Secretary has released a written statement, not a press conference, a written statement, which was distributed electronically at 6:42 Eastern Time. I'm going to read the relevant portion in full. Quote, the United States Treasury Department is aware of extraordinary volatility in currency markets that occurred in the early morning hours. We are in active communication with the Federal Reserve, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, and our counterpart at the G7 finance ministries. We are committed to the stability, United States financial system, and are working with urgency to understand the origin and scope of this morning's market event. We ask for calm, patience, and trust in the institutional frameworks that have served this nation for generations. A further statement will be issued within the hour. That statement contains no specific numbers. It contains no admission that the dollar has lost 52% of its value. It contains no concrete action items. What it tells us is that the Treasury is still in assessment mode and that they do not yet have a plan they are ready to announce publicly. I want to be honest with our listeners about what that statement is and is not. It is not a reassurance. It is a placeholder.
It's approaching 7 o'clock in the morning on the East Coast, and I can tell you that what I'm feeling in this newsroom right now is a kind of controlled urgency that I have not felt since, I want to be careful with this comparison, Since the early hours of other major crises that this broadcast team has covered, our phones have not stopped, our digital inbox has not stopped. People are reaching out from every corner of the country and well beyond it. I want to read another message, this one from a listener in rural Kentucky, who writes, "We don't have much here, but we have a garden and a community. My neighbor just came over and said the feed store is closing because they don't know what to charge. That's the feed store where the farmers in this county get what they need to keep their animals alive. If the feed store closes, the animals can't eat. If the animals can't eat, the farms fall apart. Nobody in the city thinks about the farms." She's right. Nobody is thinking about the farms yet. We are thinking about it now, and we're going to come back to the agricultural supply chain in the next segment.
At 4 hours and 50 minutes, I want to address the question of causation, because I know our listeners want to understand not just what is happening, but why. We have 3 working hypotheses that our financial desk has been developing in consultation with economic analysts we have been able to reach this morning. The first hypothesis is a coordinated speculative attack, a deliberate, orchestrated effort by one or more large financial actors to trigger a dollar collapse, possibly for geopolitical or financial gain. The scale of the overnight sell order supports this possibility. The second hypothesis is algorithmic cascade, a scenario in which automated trading systems, responding to an initial shock of uncertain origin, amplified a relatively modest downturn into a full collapse through self-reinforcing sell signals. This is sometimes called a flash crash at the equity level, but nothing at this scale has ever been observed in the currency markets. The third hypothesis, and this is the one that several of our contacts in the intelligence and financial communities have alluded to without directly confirming, is a cyber attack on the clearing infrastructure itself. Not just a trade, but an attack on the systems that settle and verify currency transactions, causing systemic data corruption that could have produced false signals and triggered cascading failures. We cannot confirm any of these 3 hypotheses at this hour. What I can tell you is that the FBI's cyber division and the NSA's financial infrastructure team are both, according to sources, actively engaged. That engagement suggests the third hypothesis is not being dismissed.
We're 6 hours in. The sun has been up for a little while now on the East Coast, and that means the visual reality of this crisis is starting to crystallize in ways that the pre-dawn darkness concealed. I want to paint that picture for our listeners. In New York City, there are reports from multiple contacts that the lines outside Chase, Bank of America, Citibank, and Wells Fargo branches stretch around the block in Midtown, in the financial district, in Brooklyn, in the Bronx. People have been waiting since before the branches opened. Several branches have reportedly closed their doors again after opening, citing, quote, "by system issues," which may mean they are overwhelmed or may mean their electronic systems are not functioning under the weight of the traffic. On social media, we're monitoring what we can. There are images being shared of grocery stores in Atlanta, in Houston, in Seattle, in Detroit, where entire sections of shelving appear to have been cleared, not vandalized, cleared. People buying, people preparing. In Detroit specifically, we're hearing that a standoff broke out at a gas station on the east side when the price of gas appeared on the pump in a new, dramatically higher number. Nobody fired, nobody was hurt, but there was a confrontation and police were called. The first brush of what this kind of pressure does to communities, it's going to get worse before it gets better, and I think our listeners know that.
I want to give our listeners the first casualty figures of this event, and I want to contextualize them carefully. As of 6 hours and 30 minutes into this crisis, we are aware of confirmed deaths in 3 categories. First, traffic fatalities. 7 people have been killed in accidents on U.S. highways and urban roads in the past 3 hours, in incidents that first responders are explicitly linking to panic-related driving. People speeding, running lights, driving erratically, while on their phones during what should have been a routine morning commute. Second, medical. 2 confirmed deaths at hospitals in separate cities. 1 in Phoenix, Arizona, and 1 in Newark, New Jersey, that have been attributed, according to contacts at those facilities, to delays in medication delivery caused by supply chain disruptions that began this morning. A diabetic patient in Phoenix went into crisis when an insulin delivery was held up. A cardiac patient in Newark experienced complications when a scheduled procedure was postponed due to supply uncertainty. 2 deaths at 6.5 hours. That number is going to grow. Third, in the category of civil unrest, there has been 1 confirmed fatality in Memphis, Tennessee, where a confrontation at a cash-only food market on Beale Street escalated to physical violence. Police are at the scene. I want to be very clear. The total confirmed death toll as of this hour is 10 people. 10. That number will be updated as information becomes available.
10 people. Most of them just trying to get to work, get their medicine, get food for their families. I want to say their names, but we don't have their names yet, and I think we owe it to them to wait until we have them confirmed before we say them on air. What I can say is this: every single one of those 10 deaths represents a family that is going to spend the rest of today and the rest of their lives marked by this morning. A child who won't see their parent come home, a spouse waiting by a phone that isn't ringing. I think it's very easy in a crisis like this to get lost in the macroeconomics, the trillions of dollars, the reserve currencies, the global supply chains, and those things matter and we have to report them. But I want us to keep coming back to this. At the core of every economic statistic is a human being who is hungry or frightened or grieving. That's who we're broadcasting for.
At 7 hours and 20 minutes, I want to update our listeners on the international response. The G7 finance ministers have announced an emergency virtual summit, which began approximately 45 minutes ago. We do not yet have any communiqué from that summit. The International Monetary Fund has released a statement calling the situation, quote, unprecedented in the post-Bretton Woods era, and pledging to deploy its emergency stabilization frameworks. The European Central Bank has announced it is suspending euro-dollar exchange operations until further notice. The Bank of Japan has convened an emergency meeting of its policy board. The People's Bank of China has released a statement in Mandarin. Our translation desk has reviewed it, which states that China is monitoring the situation closely and is, quote, prepared to take all necessary measures to protect the integrity of its domestic financial system. That last phrase, protect the integrity of its domestic financial system, is language that economists have historically associated with capital controls and currency isolation. In practical terms, it may mean China is preparing to decouple its financial system from dollar-denominated trade. The implications of that, if it materializes, would extend far beyond this morning. The international oil market, which is priced almost entirely in dollars, has effectively seized. The price of crude oil per barrel, when calculated against the devalued dollar, has roughly doubled overnight. That means the cost of operating any vehicle, aircraft, ship, or generator that runs on petroleum-derived fuel has just doubled in dollar terms.
8 hours into this, I want to share what's happening in some of the communities that don't always make the top of the broadcast. We have a message from a listener in rural New Mexico near the town of Gallup who writes, we're on the Navajo Nation and we've been through hard things before, but the trading posts here are closing because they say they can't process card transactions. Nobody has cash. There's no ATM for 30 miles. We have elders who need medication and we can't get it because the pharmacy can't process anything. We're not a sidebar. We're people. We hear you. And that listener's message speaks to something that Daniel and I have been discussing off air, which is which is that this crisis is not hitting everyone equally. It is hitting hardest in places with the least margin, rural communities, communities already experiencing poverty, communities that depend on supply chains that extend deep through multiple layers of dollar-denominated pricing. Those are the places that will break first, and those are the places that historically receive the last of the relief.
9 hours and 15 minutes into this event. I need to update the casualty figures. Confirmed deaths are now at 47. The increase since my last report is driven primarily by two developments. First, there have been reports of civil unrest escalating in several major cities. In Los Angeles, confrontations near downtown grocery outlets and fuel stations resulted in 14 additional deaths. I want to be precise. 11 from gunfire, 3 from injuries sustained in crowd crushes. The Los Angeles Police Department has requested National Guard support, and the California governor has issued a state of emergency declaration. Second, and more sobering to me from a systemic standpoint, we are beginning to receive reports of hospital systems in at least 4 states, Texas, Florida, Illinois, and New York, reporting what they are calling critical supply interruptions. 3 deaths in Texas and 4 in Illinois are being attributed by medical staff to medication delivery failures. The number 47 will change. Our reporting team is tracking it continuously. I also want to note, the FAA ground stop has been extended indefinitely. As of 45 minutes ago, there are 0 commercial domestic departures operating in the continental United States. 0. That is the first time that has occurred outside of the immediate post-September 11th period.
Let me tell you about a high school teacher in Cincinnati named, well, she didn't give her name, she gave her initials, SR, who sent us a message about an hour ago. She wrote, "I went to school anyway, somebody had to. I have 40 kids in my building today. Half the school didn't come in, the teachers or the students, but the ones who came, they needed somewhere to be, and we sat in the gym because the heating system shut down at 7 a.m. Apparently the fuel delivery company canceled all contracts pending pricing renegotiation. We sat together in our coats and I read to them from a history book about other times when things fell apart and people still got through. I don't know if that helped, but I showed up. I think that story belongs in this broadcast alongside every treasury statement and every market metric, because what that teacher did this morning is also what humans do. They show up, they create warmth in cold rooms, they read aloud to frightened kids. That is also what is happening right now in America and in a lot of places beyond it.
11 hours into this event. The Federal Reserve has now convened an emergency board meeting, confirmed by a brief notice posted to their website at approximately 9:47 Eastern. And the chairperson is expected to make a statement within the next 30 minutes. We'll carry that live. In the meantime, I want to address what is happening in Europe, because the ripple effects on the continent have been severe and are accelerating. In Germany, the Frankfurt Stock Exchange opened this morning, and within 4 minutes had triggered its own circuit breakers after a cascade of sell orders hit dollar-exposed industries, automotive, manufacturing, chemical, simultaneously. The DAX is down approximately 31% from yesterday's close, a staggering single morning decline. In France, the CAC 40 has suspended trading entirely. In the United Kingdom, the FTSE 100 opened and then closed again within 8 minutes. The Bank of England governor gave a brief statement, and I'm paraphrasing here, saying the UK was, quote, experiencing extraordinary external financial pressure, and that the bank was, quote, exploring all available mechanisms. In Eastern Europe, several countries whose economies are more directly dollar-pegged, notably Ecuador, which uses the US dollar as its official currency, are in acute crisis. Ecuador's president declared a national economic emergency at 8:30 this morning, local time. Panama, which also uses the dollar, has done the same. Liberia and El Salvador, both of which use the dollar as legal tender, are reporting complete paralysis of their domestic economies. When your national currency is the dollar, a 52% devaluation is not a financial problem. It is a civilizational one.
12 hours, we're at 12 hours. I want to take a moment because 12 hours it means this is now happening in the afternoon on the East Coast. It means children are coming home from schools that maybe stayed open, maybe closed. It means people are getting off shifts, the ones who had shifts to go to. It means families are sitting in kitchens together, asking each other what they know and admitting how much they don't know. And there's a particular cruelty to the timing of this, isn't there? Because economic crises are not like storms or earthquakes. They don't have a visible physical shape. You can't point to the thing that is hurting you. There's no rubble to photograph. There's just a number, 52%, that is rearranging everything. And most people won't feel the sharpest edges of it until the next time they try to buy medicine or pay rent or fill a tank. I want to read one more message from a listener, this one from a man in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I am a veteran. I have been through hard things. I am not panicking, but my mother is 81 and she needs her blood pressure medication, and I cannot get it filled because the pharmacy says their system is down. She's been without her medication for 8 hours. I'm sitting here with her and I'm watching her hands shake, and I want someone to tell me who to call. I've tried every number I can find. I can't reach anyone. Can you help us? We cannot help them directly, but someone listening right now might be able to. If you are a pharmacist, if you are a medical professional, if you have resources, the phone lines to this broadcast are open.
12 hours and 40 minutes. The Federal Reserve Chair has just concluded a press conference. I have notes from the full statement. The chair confirmed, for the first time in an official capacity, that the US dollar has experienced what he called, quote, a significant and unprecedented devaluation event of approximately 52%. He announced the following emergency measures. First, an emergency interest rate action. The Fed will set the federal funds rate at 0 and will simultaneously activate an emergency bond purchasing program of up to $5 trillion to inject liquidity into frozen credit markets. Second, the Fed will coordinate with the Treasury to issue emergency currency stabilization notes, a form of backed guarantee to international dollar holders designed to prevent further loss of confidence. Third, all U.S. banks are now authorized by emergency directive to impose withdrawal limits of $500 per day per account holder. That last measure, the $500 limit, is what I expect will generate the most immediate public response. It is, in effect, a partial freezing of the banking system. In historical precedent, it most closely resembles the banking restrictions imposed in Argentina in 2001 during their peso crisis. The chair ended his remarks by saying, "We did not cause this. We will solve this. It will take time." End quote.
$500 a day. I want to sit with that number for a moment because I know what it means for the family in Columbus that called us 8 hours ago. It means the mortgage payment, if it comes due in 3 weeks, may not be processable. It means the business owner who has payroll to make this Friday is looking at an arithmetic problem with no solution. It means the single parent who lives paycheck to paycheck, which is a staggering number of people in this country, is looking at a wall. And now on top of that, for the first time in this broadcast, I'm going to say something that I think needs to be said plainly. People are going to make desperate choices, not because they are bad people, because they are people in an impossible corner. We've already seen 14 deaths in Los Angeles from confrontations near grocery stores. I want to say clearly and without judgment, if you are in a place where you feel unsafe, please prioritize your safety. Please keep your children close. Please check on your neighbors. especially the elderly, especially those with medical needs. The institutions that we normally turn to in a crisis are under extraordinary strain right now. The community is going to matter more tonight than it has in a very long time.
14 hours in. Updated casualty figures. I want to read these carefully. Confirmed deaths attributed to this crisis now stand at 212 in the continental United States. Broken down by category: 41 traffic fatalities from panic driving incidents, 67 from civil unrest, including 9 law enforcement officers, 83 from medical system failures, primarily medication interruptions, delayed procedures, and overwhelmed emergency departments, and 21 from what are being classified as crisis-related suicides or suspected suicides, based on incoming reports from county coroners in 11 states. That last category, 21, is the one I find hardest to read, and I want to acknowledge that. Internationally, the numbers are more difficult to verify, but here is what we have. In Ecuador, which uses the dollar as its national currency, there are reports of at least 90 deaths from riots and civil unrest in Quito and Guayaquil. In El Salvador, at least 35. In Liberia, where the economy is heavily dollarized and poverty was already acute, early reports from NGO contacts suggest potentially hundreds of casualties from unrest and medical crises, though we cannot verify those numbers with precision at this hour. The global death toll as of 14 hours into this event is estimated, conservatively, at above 400 people. It is climbing.
14 hours and 20 minutes. I've been broadcasting for most of the last 14 hours, and I'm going to take a breath here, because I think it's important to stay human during something like this rather than becoming a machine that reads numbers and field reports. What we're witnessing right now is something that most of us, myself included, were taught to believe could not happen to the dollar. The dollar was the fixed point, the thing that everything else was measured against. Children grow up learning that the dollar is what the world trades in. That bedrock belief is now gone, and I think that loss of faith in something foundational is its own kind of grief, separate from all the material consequences. I received a message this afternoon from an elderly man in Savannah, Georgia, who said he was born in 1942. He lived through the Korean War and Vietnam. He watched inflation gut the economy in the 1970s. He watched the 2008 financial crisis take his retirement savings. He wrote, "I've never felt afraid before. I feel afraid now, not for me, for my grandchildren. What world are they going to have?" I don't have an answer for him, but I think the honesty of that question is something worth broadcasting.
15 hours and 40 minutes. I want to provide a comprehensive infrastructure status update. Regarding aviation, the FAA ground stop continues. All international arrivals are being diverted to 2 processing hubs, Denver International and Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson, where Customs and Border Protection has established emergency processing protocols. Approximately 300 aircraft are in holding patterns over the Atlantic and Pacific, waiting for clearance. Regarding ground transportation, several long-haul trucking companies have suspended operations, citing fuel pricing uncertainty. The Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association released a statement saying its members are, quote, unable to operate at a sustainable margin under current conditions. This matters enormously. Approximately 70% of all goods consumed in the United States move on trucks. Regarding the power grid, Texas's ERCOT grid is reporting stress in the western regions due to a fuel supply disruption at 3 natural gas generating facilities. Rolling blackouts affecting approximately 400,000 customers began at approximately 1:30 this afternoon in West Texas. The grid operator for the Pacific Northwest is also reporting stress. Regarding food supply, the Department of Agriculture has activated its emergency food stockpile protocols. FEMA has been tasked with coordinating emergency distribution centers in coordination with state governors. 7 governors have now declared states of emergency: California, Texas, New York, Florida, Illinois, Ohio, and Washington.
16 hours in, I want to tell you about something that's also happening alongside all of this, because it would be incomplete reporting, and I think it would be dishonest to only tell the story of fear and collapse without also telling the story of what people are doing for each other. In St. Paul, Minnesota, a network of churches and community organizations opened their doors at noon today and have been providing hot meals continuously since then. A contact there tells us they've fed over 3,000 people in 4 hours. In Houston's East End neighborhood, a group of residents organized a neighborhood supply sharing network, people bringing what they had, leaving what they could spare. A retired nurse set up an informal triage station in a community center parking lot to help people who couldn't reach pharmacies or hospitals get basic care. In rural Montana, a rancher opened his property to 2 neighboring families whose homes lost heat when the fuel delivery was canceled. He said, and I want to read this exactly as he wrote it, "We don't need to understand all of it. We just need to help the people standing next to us. That's always been enough before." I believe in the accuracy of that sentence. I believe in it very much right now.
17 hours. Significant international development. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, along with their expanded membership, have released a joint communiqué. This was not unexpected by analysts, but the speed and specificity of the statement is notable. The communiqué announces the acceleration of what they are calling the BRICS settlement currency mechanism, essentially a proposed alternative reserve currency backed by a basket of BRICS nation commodities and bonds. The statement calls the current crisis, quote, "the inevitable consequence of structural over-reliance on a single national currency as the global reserve asset." The communiqué does not offer help to the United States. It offers an alternative architecture to the rest of the world. In Beijing, financial markets have not opened this week, and the People's Bank of China has announced a separate yuan-based settlement framework for bilateral trade with 11 African nations, 8 Latin American nations, and 6 Southeast Asian nations. That represents approximately 40% of global trade by volume. What we may be witnessing in real time is the beginning of the end of the dollar's role as the world's reserve currency, not as an accident of this crisis, but as a deliberate restructuring that some nations have been planning for and are now executing.
I want to return to the hospitals because the situation there has become more acute in the last 2 hours, and I don't think we're giving it enough airtime. We have a contact, a nurse in a major hospital system in Dallas, who called our listener line about 40 minutes ago. She's working a double shift because half her colleagues couldn't get in. Transportation problems, childcare collapses, fear. She told us we have people in the ER who would normally be discharged, but we can't discharge them because there's nowhere safe for them to go. We have people who need procedures who can't get them because 2 of our surgical suites are running on generator power after a grid disruption. We have a man in room 14 who is asking me every 20 minutes if his wife can come in, and I have to keep telling him visitor restrictions are in place because we're so overwhelmed that we can't safely manage non-patients in the building. He hasn't seen her in 2 days. He's frightened, she's frightened, I'm frightened, and I still have 8 hours left on my shift. 18 hours into a crisis, 8 hours left on her shift. That's who's holding this together right now.
18 hours and 50 minutes. Updated death toll. U.S. confirmed deaths are now at 641. Internationally, we are working with partial data, but the picture is increasingly severe. Ecuador, at least 310 deaths, primarily from civil unrest in major cities. El Salvador, 112 confirmed. Liberia, Estimates from NGO contacts range between 400 and 800. We cannot confirm the higher end, but we cannot dismiss it. In the Philippines, which is not dollarized but whose economy is deeply linked to dollar-denominated remittances, there are reports of severe unrest in Metro Manila, with at least 67 deaths reported by local contacts. Pakistan, whose dollar-denominated external debt has effectively doubled in cost overnight, is experiencing mass protests in Karachi and Islamabad. At least 40 deaths reported there. The global death toll, applying conservative estimates to the numbers we can partially verify, is now approaching 3,000 people at the 18-hour mark. I want to be honest about the uncertainty in that number. Some national reporting systems are not functioning. Some areas have no reliable communications, and the true count may be significantly higher. What we can say with confidence is that the human cost of this morning is now measured in thousands of lives.
20 hours in, and I want to acknowledge that both Daniel and I have now been on air for most of this event, and that some part of what we're feeling, the weight of it, is probably coming through in our voices, and I think that's okay. I don't want to perform composure that I don't have. What I have is a commitment to staying here and telling this story as accurately and humanely as we can. A message came in from a listener about an hour ago that I've been holding on to, a woman in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'm sitting in my car outside my son's school. I've been here for 2 hours. I'm not sure why exactly. I think I just wanted to be close to him. The school is still open. He doesn't know what's happening. He's in there learning about the American Revolution, and I'm out here listening to your broadcast and trying to understand how it's possible that the world changed this fast and he doesn't even know it yet. I'm going to have to explain it to him tonight. I don't know how. I think about that mother in that parking lot, and I think about all the conversations that are going to happen around dinner tables tonight, if dinner is possible, and for a lot of families it will be a harder question than usual. Conversations where parents try to explain the inexplicable to children who trusted them to keep the world stable. That is an enormous thing.
21 hours in. I want to give our listeners a clearer picture of the U.S. government's full operational status. The President has declared a national economic emergency, which activates a suite of executive powers under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. Under this declaration, the President has authorized the suspension of debt ceiling constraints for a period of 90 days to allow emergency bond issuance, the activation of the Defense Production Act to require domestic pharmaceutical manufacturers to prioritize domestic supply chains, emergency authorization for FEMA to commandeer fuel stockpiles for essential services, hospitals, emergency services, water treatment plants, and a formal request to Congress for an emergency session, which has been scheduled for 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. The White House has also made a direct request to the IMF for emergency liquidity support, the first time the United States has ever made such a request. That last fact bears repeating, because I think it is one of the most historically significant sentences I have ever had occasion to say on this broadcast. The United States of America has formally requested emergency financial assistance from the International Monetary Fund. The nation that has, since 1945, been the largest contributor to and largest guarantor of global financial stability has now become a supplicant within that same system. Whatever happens next, whether the dollar recovers or whether this is the beginning of a permanent restructuring, that sentence marks a dividing line in modern history.
22 hours. I want to read the last cluster of messages we've received tonight because I think they form a kind of mosaic of what this day has been. A college student in Austin, Texas. I have $412 in my bank account. That's everything. Rent is due Friday. I don't know what my landlord is going to charge. I haven't eaten today. I'm not panicking. I'm just very, very tired. A retired school teacher in Akron, Ohio. My pension is fixed. It was always fixed. I thought that meant it was safe. It is not safe. a young father in Seattle. My wife and I had an emergency fund. We always said 6 months of expenses. It's gone in one day, not because we spent it, but because it's worth half what it was. 6 months of saving half a day. And from a listener who did not give a location, just these words, I am not afraid of hard things. I'm afraid that the people who are supposed to know what to do next don't know. That's the thing that scares me, not the crisis, the sense that no one has a map. I think that listener has named something true and important. And the honest answer from this broadcast is the map is being drawn right now by imperfect people under impossible conditions in real time. That is the reality. That is what 22 hours in looks like.
23 hours and 10 minutes into this event, and I want to give our listeners a full, honest accounting of where things stand as we approach the end of the first day. The dollar has not recovered. After the Federal Reserve's emergency measures were announced, the dollar stabilized. It did not fall further, but it has not risen. The current consensus among the analysts and contacts our financial desk has been able to reach throughout the night is that the dollar, at this moment, is trading in a narrow band around 46 to 49 cents on the old dollar's value. The emergency bond purchasing program has provided some liquidity. The withdrawal limits have prevented a full bank run. Prevented it, not ended it. Internationally, 14 countries have now formally suspended dollar-denominated transactions. Ecuador, El Salvador, Panama, Zimbabwe, Liberia, Cambodia, the Marshall Islands, the Federated States of Micronesia, Palau, Timor-Leste, Turks and Caicos, the British Virgin Islands, and 2 other Pacific Island nations. Those are the countries whose economies were fully dollarized. Their situation is categorically different from the rest of the world. Without a functional dollar, they have, in effect, no currency at all. Their governments are scrambling to adopt emergency alternative frameworks. Some are looking at euro adoption, some at regional currency pegs, some at commodity-backed tokens that have never been operationally tested. None of those transitions will be smooth. None will be fast.
And now we are at 24 hours. It is approximately 5 in the morning on the East Coast, or just before 5, which means we have arrived more or less at the same point on the clock that we started at yesterday morning. Yesterday at this time, Daniel and I were preparing the morning's regular programming. I was going over a segment on community resilience in small-town America, a very different story than the one we have been telling for the last 24 hours. I want to close this day, not this story this day, by naming some things that I know to be true, regardless of what the markets do tomorrow. I know that the nurse in Dallas is still on shift. I know that the teacher in Cincinnati is going back to school tomorrow morning. I know that the churches in St. Paul are already planning to open their doors again at dawn. I know that the farmer in rural Kentucky is going to check on her animals in the dark before the sun comes up. I know that the mother in Albuquerque is going to find words for her son over breakfast. I know these things because I know what people do. I have been covering human beings for a long time, and when the world breaks, human beings are the ones who pick up the pieces. Not perfectly, not without loss, not without grief, but they pick them up. They do.
Before I give our final summary of the first 24 hours, I want to address something directly to our listeners who are exhausted and frightened and who want to know, what now? The honest answer is that the next 72 hours are critical. The emergency Federal Reserve measures need to hold long enough to restore even partial market function. Congress's emergency session tomorrow morning will determine whether the government can pass the fiscal measures needed to backstop the banking system and fund the food and medical emergency distribution networks. The G7 summit, which has been ongoing in various configurations throughout today, is expected to produce some form of coordinated international response within the next 24 hours. The dollar will not return to its previous value quickly. Most economists who have spoken to us today are skeptical that it will return to full previous value at all, at least in the short to medium term. What they believe is more likely is a period of negotiated stabilization, a new baseline valuation that is lower than where we were, supported by international agreements and domestic reform. That is not a recovery. That is a recalibration. It is painful. It is not the end.
Before we go to what Daniel is going to give you as the definitive accounting of this first day, I want to say one thing on behalf of both of us. We've been broadcasting for 24 hours. We have not slept. We have not eaten much. There have been moments in this broadcast, I will admit this, where I felt the full weight of what we were describing and had to find something inside myself to keep going. I found it every time in the voices of our listeners, in the nurse, in the teacher, in the veteran sitting with his mother, in the college student who said he was tired but not panicking. You gave us the reason to keep broadcasting. You gave us the human story behind the numbers. You gave us the truth of what this day actually was. We are going to keep going. We are not signing off. We are going to take a 30-minute break at 6 o'clock, and then we will be back with the morning coverage. But before that, Daniel is going to give you the full accounting of this day.
Here is the definitive accounting of the first 24 hours of the dollar collapse. On the question of what ultimately happened, the US dollar did not recover to its pre-crisis value. After 48 hours of Federal Reserve emergency intervention and a coordinated G7 currency stabilization agreement signed 2 days after the collapse, the dollar stabilized at approximately 61 cents on its former value, a 39% permanent devaluation from the pre-crisis baseline. This represented the largest sustained currency devaluation of a major reserve currency in modern financial history. The dollar survived. It did not recover. On the question of the global death toll, in the first 96 hours of the crisis, the acute phase, confirmed deaths attributable to the event totaled 11,432 worldwide. The primary causes, in order, civil unrest and violence, primarily in dollarized economies and high-poverty urban centers. Medical system failures due to pharmaceutical and supply chain disruption. Infrastructure accidents, including transportation fatalities, and economic stress-related suicides, which spiked in every country for which data was available in the weeks following the event. The final count, including delayed deaths from health system failures in the subsequent weeks, reached approximately 22,000 globally. It was a catastrophe. It was not an extinction. On the question of what infrastructure remained, the U.S. banking system was partially operational within 72 hours under emergency protocols. The withdrawal limits of $500 per day remained in effect for 11 weeks. Commercial aviation resumed domestically within 4 days, though at greatly reduced volume. The Port of Los Angeles and Port of Long Beach resumed limited operations within 60 hours. Food distribution remained stressed for 9 weeks in rural and low-income areas, with FEMA and National Guard distribution networks providing essential supply to approximately 30 million Americans during that period. Hospitals restabilized pharmaceutical supply chains within 2 weeks, aided by emergency government contracts. The power grid operated with significant stress for approximately 6 weeks, with rolling blackouts affecting parts of Texas, the Pacific Northwest, and the Southwest during that period. On the question of the dollarized nations, the 14 countries that used the US dollar as their official currency faced the most severe long-term consequences. Ecuador adopted the euro as a temporary bridge currency under an emergency EU agreement, a transition that took 14 months and cost an estimated $420 billion in economic output. El Salvador, after weeks of political turmoil, adopted a regional Central American currency basket. Liberia experienced political collapse and a prolonged economic emergency that lasted nearly 3 years, with international humanitarian organizations managing essential services throughout that period. The other dollarized territories negotiated arrangements with their nearest large economic partners, some successfully, some not. On the question of the global financial architecture, the dollar survived as a reserve currency, but no longer as the dominant reserve currency. The BRICS settlement framework launched 6 weeks after the crisis, and within 18 months, accounted for approximately 31% of global trade settlement, a figure that had previously been near zero. The IMF convened an emergency Bretton Woods-style conference 14 months after the crisis, producing the Geneva Accords, which established a multipolar reserve currency system, the dollar, the euro, the yuan, and a new SDR-linked basket currency, all serving as parallel reserve assets. The era of dollar dominance, which had defined global finance since 1944, ended on the morning that we have been broadcasting through. On the question of whether humanity stabilized, adapted, or faced long-term consequences, the answer is all three. Humanity stabilized, slowly, painfully, with enormous human cost, and with the kind of improvised, imperfect cooperation that humans have always used to survive the things that should not have been survivable. Humanity adapted. The global financial system was rebuilt, not to its previous form, but to a new form, more distributed and arguably more resilient. And humanity faced long-term consequences. The economic scars of this event lasted for years, with unemployment peaking at 18% in the United States, 14 months after the crisis, before beginning a slow recovery, and with global poverty rates increasing by an estimated 90 million people. In the first 2 years, the world did not end. But it changed, irrevocably and completely. This is Daniel Voss. We are still here. We are still broadcasting. We will be back in 30 minutes.
And this is Maya Ross. In the history of radio, there is a tradition when everything is uncertain, you stay on the air, you keep the voice going, you keep the light on. We're keeping it on, 30 minutes, don't go anywhere, you don't have to face this morning alone.